There is a photograph, not widely circulated, taken backstage at the Palace Theatre in October 1951. In it, Judy Garland sits alone in front of a mirror framed by incandescent bulbs. She is dressed in a dark suit, her hair styled immaculately, her makeup perfect. The show has just ended, 19 weeks of sold-out performances. The applause still echoes faintly through the walls. She is 30 years old, but in the photograph she is not smiling. Her hands rest in her lap, palms upward, as though waiting for something that will never arrive. The mirror reflects only her face, not triumph, not relief, just a profound, unmistakable exhaustion. The bulbs cast harsh light on her features, creating shadows beneath her eyes that makeup cannot conceal. Around her there are flowers, dozens of them, sent by admirers who will never meet her. The contrast is almost unbearable. A woman surrounded by evidence of adoration, yet entirely, devastatingly alone. That photograph is not famous because it does not show the Judy Garland the world paid to see. It shows the woman she became when the curtain fell and the crowd went home. It shows what it cost her to be loved by millions while understanding on some fundamental level that none of them actually knew her. It shows the face of someone who had given everything and received, in return, only the performance of love, loud, temporary, and conditional. This is the story of Judy Garland. And it is not the story most people think they know. It is not simply the tale of a girl who sang over the rainbow and became immortal. It is the story of a woman who was made into a product before she understood what a childhood was. It is the story of a voice that could fill concert halls and break hearts, belonging to a person who spent most of her life seeking something she could never name. It is the story of someone who ruled Broadway, commanded stages across the world, and died broke, exhausted, and alone in a locked bathroom in London at the age of 47, weighing less than 90 pounds. The world remembers Judy Garland as a legend. But legends are what we create when we prefer the symbol to the person. And the person, Frances Ethel Gumm, later known as Judy, lived a life of such relentless exploitation, chemical dependency, financial ruin, and emotional deprivation that her survival to middle age was itself a kind of miracle. This is the story of that survival and of what it cost. Frances Ethel Gumm was born on June 10, 1922, in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, a small iron mining town where ambition had nowhere to go but out. Her parents ran a movie theatre. Her father, Frank, played piano. Her mother, Ethel, had once dreamed of being a performer herself, and when that dream died, she transferred it, intact, demanding and non-negotiable, onto her daughters. By the time Frances was 2.5 years old, she was on stage, not because she asked to be, but because Ethel decided it. The Gumm sisters, Mary Jane, Virginia, and little Frances, performed at the theatre between film screenings, singing popular songs in matching costumes. Frances was the youngest, the smallest, the one with the voice that didn't quite belong to a toddler. People noticed. Ethel noticed them noticing. There is a particular kind of childhood that occurs when a parent sees their child not as a person, but as an opportunity. Frances Gumm had that childhood. Ethel Gumm was relentless, ambitious, and by most accounts indifferent to the emotional needs of her daughters. She pushed them from town to town, theatre to theatre, always chasing the bigger audience, the better booking. Frank Gumm, quieter and perhaps kinder, was also rumoured to have interests that made the family unwelcome in certain towns, whispers about his attention to young men that forced them to leave Grand Rapids altogether. So the Gumms moved to California, to Lancaster, a desert town where Ethel could be closer to Los Angeles, closer to the studios, closer to the dream that was never really Frances's dream at all. Frances was enrolled in school, but school was an interruption. What mattered was the act. What mattered was the performance. What mattered was becoming someone the audience would pay to see. And so Frances learned early what many child performers learn, that love, parental love, public love, was conditional. It arrived when you sang well, when you smiled on cue, when you made them happy. It disappeared when you were tired, when you gained weight, when you were simply ordinarily human. She learned to perform not just on stage, but in life. She learned to suppress what she felt and produce what was required. She learned that her worth was not inherent but earned, night after night, in the glare of stage lights and the hunger of her mother's eyes. By 13 she was signed to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, By 13, her name was no longer her own. Frances Gumm became Judy Garland, a name chosen by someone else, a persona constructed by studio executives who saw in her not a girl, but a product with a remarkable voice and a face that could be made to fit their needs. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in the 1930s was not simply a film studio. It was a factory, and its product was fantasy. The studio controlled everything: what you wore, what you ate, whom you dated, what you said in interviews. And if you were young, if you were valuable, they controlled your body with a ruthlessness that would be criminal by today's standards. Judy Garland was put on her first diet at 14. Studio executives looked at her, a normal, healthy teenage girl, and decided she was too heavy to be a star. They called her the Little Hunchback, mocked her appearance, compared her to the taller, thinner actresses under contract. Louis B. Mayer, the head of MGM, allegedly referred to her as my little hunchback with something between affection and disdain. The message was clear: you are not acceptable as you are. So they gave her pills, amphetamines, to suppress her appetite and keep her energetic for 18-hour shooting days, barbiturates to bring her down at night so she could sleep. By 15, Judy Garland was chemically dependent, not because she sought drugs, but because the studio, essentially her employer, her guardian, her entire world, required it. They did this to many young performers, but Judy, with her sensitivity, her anxiety, her deep need to please, became one of the most damaged. In 1939, she was cast as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. She was 16 years old. The film was grueling to make: hot, uncomfortable costumes, endless retakes, demanding choreography. But when it was released, it made her immortal. Over the Rainbow, sung by a girl in a gingham dress yearning for a place where troubles melt like lemon drops, became one of the most iconic performances in film history. But what did Judy Garland actually want? Not fame, necessarily. Not immortality. She wanted to be loved. She wanted to be safe. She wanted, perhaps, to be ordinary, a wish that was now impossible. The girl who sang about escaping to somewhere over the rainbow was trapped in a life that would never allow her that escape. She was MGM's property, and she would remain so for another decade. The studio made her into a star, but stardom is not the same as selfhood. She was paired romantically with Mickey Rooney in a series of profitable musicals, wholesome, energetic, relentlessly cheerful films that bore no resemblance to the reality of her life. Off camera, she was anxious, increasingly dependent on pills, and desperate for affection she rarely received. Her father had died when she was 12. Her mother was more manager than nurturer. The studio system offered contracts, not care. She worked constantly. Between 1939 and 1949, she made nearly 30 films. She sang, she danced, she performed with a vitality that seemed boundless because the pills made it seem that way. But vitality that comes from amphetamines is not real energy. It is a loan against future collapse, and Judy Garland was borrowing against herself at rates she could never repay. Judy Garland married 5 times. Each marriage began with hope and ended in disappointment, not because she did not try, but because she was looking for something no marriage could provide: a stable sense of self, a life unmarred by exploitation, a love that did not require performance. Her first husband was David Rose, a composer, whom she married in 1941 at 19. The marriage lasted 2 years. Her second was Vincente Minnelli, the director, whom she married in 1945. That marriage produced her first child, Liza, in 1946, and ended in divorce in 1951. Then came Sid Luft, a producer and promoter, whom she married in 1952. That marriage gave her 2 more children, Lorna and Joey, and lasted 13 tumultuous years. Later came Mark Herron, a younger actor, and finally Mickey Deans, a nightclub manager she married just months before her death. None of these men were villains necessarily, though some exploited her financially and emotionally. But none of them could solve the fundamental problem of Judy Garland's life, that she had been destroyed, systematically, by an industry that valued her voice more than her humanity. What happened when that restlessness collided with motherhood? Judy loved her children. By all accounts, she was warm, funny, devoted when she was present. But she was also unreliable, erratic, struggling with addiction and mental health in an era that had no vocabulary or treatment for what she was experiencing. Her children grew up in the orbit of her chaos, sometimes bathed in her affection, sometimes abandoned when she could not hold herself together. Liza Minnelli would later speak of her mother with a mix of love and sorrow, describing a woman who could be magical one moment and devastatingly absent the next. It is one of the quiet tragedies of Judy's life that she wanted to give her children the stability she never had, but was too damaged to provide it consistently. In 1950, MGM fired Judy Garland. She was 28 years old. She had made them millions. She had been one of their most bankable stars for over a decade, but she was also by then unreliable. Years of forced diets, pills, and relentless work schedules had left her physically and mentally fragile. She missed shooting days. She arrived late, disoriented. She attempted suicide more than once. The studio had no patience for the wreckage they had created. They terminated her contract and moved on. There was no pension, no severance, no acknowledgement that they had systematically destroyed a teenage girl and then discarded her when she stopped being profitable. She was simply let go, cast out from the only professional world she had ever known. For many stars this would have been the end, and for a time it nearly was. Judy spiraled, more pills, more suicide attempts, more despair. She was hospitalized, she was broke, her career, it seemed, was over. But then came the resurrection. In 1951, Sid Luft, who would become her third husband, convinced her to return to the stage. Not film, but live performance. A medium where her raw talent, her connection with an audience, could shine without the interference of studio control. She opened at the London Palladium, terrified, trembling, certain she would fail. She did not fail. She triumphed. The audience rose to their feet before she finished her first song. They wept, they roared, they loved her with a ferocity that was almost frightening. And Judy, standing in the spotlight, felt for the first time in years that she was enough. Not because she was thin or young or obedient, but because she could sing. She brought the show to Broadway, to the Palace Theatre, and it became legendary. Critics called it one of the greatest performances they had ever seen. She was raw, vulnerable, exhausted, and brilliant. She had turned her brokenness into art. But triumph, for Judy Garland, was never permanent. The 1950s and early 1960s were a cycle of comebacks and collapses. She made A Star Is Born in 1954, delivering a performance so powerful that many believed she would win the Academy Award. She did not. Grace Kelly won that year for The Country Girl, and when Judy lost, it felt like another rejection by the industry that had made and broken her. She returned to live performance again and again. Concerts, television specials, tours. In 1961, she performed at Carnegie Hall, a concert that was recorded and became one of the best-selling live albums of all time. She was 49 years old, ravaged by years of pills and stress, and yet her voice, damaged deeper but still unmistakably hers, could command a room like no one else. But offstage, her life was chaos. She owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in back taxes. She had been cheated by managers, ex-husbands, and hangers-on. She was still dependent on pills, uppers to function, downers to sleep, alcohol to numb the spaces in between. She was lonely, desperately, crushingly lonely. The woman who could make audiences weep with joy could not find peace in her own skin. She gave and gave on stage, in interviews, to anyone who needed her to be Judy Garland, the legend. But there was no one to give back to the person beneath the performance. There was no reserve left. She was running on fumes, on muscle memory, on the sheer inability to imagine any other way to live. By 1969, Judy Garland was 47 years old and looked a decade older. She was frail, weighing less than 90 pounds, her health destroyed by years of substance abuse. She had married Mickey Deans, a man 12 years her junior, in a ceremony that felt less like a wedding and more like a last grasp at stability. They moved to London, where she hoped to restart her career. She performed a few concerts, but her voice was failing. Audiences who came expecting the Judy of Carnegie Hall were met instead with a woman who sometimes forgot lyrics, who seemed disoriented, who was clearly painfully unwell. Some booed. Some walked out. And then, on June 22nd, 1969, Mickey Deans found her dead in the bathroom of their rented Mews house in Chelsea. The coroner ruled it an accidental overdose of barbiturates. There was no note. There was no dramatic final gesture. There was only a small exhausted woman who had finally, quietly stopped. She died nearly broke. The funeral expenses were paid by friends. Thousands lined the streets in New York to pay their respects, but the woman they mourned was not someone they had known. They mourned the voice. They mourned Dorothy. They mourned the legend. But the person, Frances Ethel Gumm, who had been used and discarded, who had loved imperfectly and suffered immensely, was mourned by far fewer. So what remains of Judy Garland? There are 3 children. Liza Minnelli, who inherited her mother's talent and some of her demons, became a star in her own right. Lorna Luft and Joey Luft, who have spent much of their lives making sense of the chaos they grew up in, defending their mother's memory, trying to separate the legend from the woman they loved. There is the grave. She is buried at Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale, New York, in a mausoleum that fans still visit, leaving flowers and notes and photographs. There is the work. The Wizard of Oz still plays somewhere in the world every day. Over the Rainbow is still sung at graduations, at weddings, at moments when people need to believe in the possibility of escape. Her films, her concerts, her recordings, they endure. The voice endures. But what remains most powerfully is the cautionary tale. Judy Garland's life is a mirror held up to an industry that consumes people and calls it entertainment. It is a reminder that talent does not protect you, that fame is not safety, that adoration from strangers is no substitute for actual love. It is the story of what happens when a child is turned into a commodity and then blamed for breaking under the weight of it. She was not a tragic figure because she was weak. She was tragic because she was strong enough to survive as long as she did. She endured more than most people could imagine: abuse, exploitation, addiction, heartbreak, financial ruin, and still she got up and performed. Still she sang. Still she tried. There is something unbearably sad about that resilience, because it was not enough. It could never be enough. The system that broke her did not fail. It functioned exactly as designed. It extracted everything of value from Judy Garland and left her at the end with almost nothing, except the voice, except the work, except the improbable fact that a girl from Grand Rapids, Minnesota, who never had a childhood, who was fed pills by adults who should have protected her, who was used and betrayed and abandoned, somehow became one of the greatest performers in history. That is not redemption. That is not a happy ending. But it is perhaps the only victory Judy Garland ever won, that long after the people who exploited her are forgotten, she is remembered, not as a victim, though she was one, not as a cautionary tale, though her life offers many warnings, but as an artist, as a voice, as someone who, despite everything, gave the world something beautiful. There is no neat moral to Judy Garland's story. She was not saved. She did not overcome. She did not find peace. She died young, alone and in pain, destroyed by an industry that has since mythologized her suffering and profited from it repeatedly. But if we are honest, if we look past the legend and see the person, we see someone who deserved better. We see a girl who should have been allowed to be a girl. We see a woman who should have been valued for more than her ability to perform. We see a human being who needed help and received exploitation instead. And we see, perhaps most importantly, that the cost of our entertainment is sometimes a life, that the voices we love, the performances we treasure, the icons we worship, they belong to people. Fragile, flawed, hurting people who do not stop being human just because we decide they are legends. Judy Garland was more than Dorothy. She was more than the girl who sang Over the Rainbow. She was Frances Ethel Gumm, a woman who tried, who failed, who loved, who suffered, and who left behind a body of work that will outlive everyone who hurt her. That is not enough. It should not have to be enough, but it is what remains. But it is what remains, Trinkudi. And maybe, in remembering her not just as a star but as a person, we honor the life she deserved to live, more than the one she was forced to endure. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.